Have you ever looked someone in the eyes while they lied straight to your face about something that meant the world to you? That moment when your stomach drops and you realize that the person standing in front of you, someone who's supposed to be family, would betray you without a second thought. I never imagined my engagement ring would become the center of a family conspiracy, or that I'd have to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for myself. The day I discovered what my mother-in-law had done, something inside me changed forever. I went from being the agreeable, people-pleasing fiancé to someone who refused to be stepped on ever again. And trust me, the fallout was both devastating and more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. Hey everyone! Welcome back to another story time. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and let's get into today's wild story about family betrayal and sweet, sweet revenge. James and I had been together for 4 years when he proposed. The proposal was everything I had dreamed of. James down on one knee at sunset on the beach, presenting me with his grandmother's ring. The diamond caught the last rays of sunlight, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to promise a beautiful future. I remember crying as I said yes, overwhelmed by the love I felt and the acceptance into James's family that the ring symbolized. Or so I thought. From the beginning, I had sensed that James's mother, Diane, had reservations about me. Diane was the type of woman who entered a room and immediately commanded attention. Designer clothes, immaculate makeup, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. During our first meeting, Diane had looked me up and down with barely concealed disappointment, as if mentally cataloging all the ways I wasn't good enough for her precious son. James has always had such unique taste, Diane had said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The comment stung, but I brushed it off, determined to win my future mother-in-law's approval. What I didn't know then was that Diane had other plans, specifically plans that involved her daughter, Melissa, James's younger sister. Melissa was the golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong in Diane's eyes. She was also perpetually single, despite Diane's constant attempts at matchmaking. As the wedding planning began, Diane inserted herself into every decision. The venue wasn't prestigious enough. The flowers weren't exotic enough. The guest list wasn't exclusive enough. With each criticism, I felt my dream wedding slipping through my fingers. "Tracy, dear," she would say, placing her manicured hand on my arm with just enough pressure to feel like a warning. "I'm only trying to help. After all, this wedding reflects on our entire family." James tried to run interference, but he'd spent a lifetime navigating his mother's manipulations and sometimes couldn't see the forest for the trees. "Mom means well," he'd say. "When you're planning a wedding, you expect some drama. A bridesmaid backs out, the caterer doubles their price, or your cousin insists on bringing her 5 children to your adults-only reception. Normal stuff. What you don't expect is for your future mother-in-law to become your own personal saboteur." The incident with my engagement ring didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of months of subtle undermining and not-so-subtle disapproval. In retrospect, I should have seen it coming. But love has a way of making you overlook red flags, especially when they're coming from your fiancé's mother. Our engagement party was the first major event where I witnessed Diane's true colors. James and I had decided on a casual backyard celebration. String lights, good food, close friends, and family. Nothing fancy, just genuine happiness. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for Diane. "An engagement party at your apartment?" she had scoffed during our planning conversation. James's cousin had hers at the Westfield Country Club. It was featured in the society pages. The way she emphasized society pages made it clear where her priorities lay. Despite her objections, we stuck to our plans. The night of the party arrived, and everything was perfect. Until Diane showed up wearing a floor-length white gown that could have easily passed for a wedding dress. She spent the entire evening introducing Melissa to every single male guest, regardless of their relationship status, while simultaneously finding ways to separate me from James. "Oh, Tracy, be a dear and help in the kitchen," she'd say, or, "James, come meet the Hendersons. They've known you since you were in diapers." By the end of the night, I'd barely spent 10 minutes with my own fiancé. But the real trouble started when Melissa broke up with her boyfriend, a month before our wedding. Suddenly, Diane's campaign against me intensified. She began calling James daily with urgent family matters that mysteriously required his immediate attention. Our wedding planning sessions were constantly interrupted by her emergencies. "I don't understand why you're so upset," James would say after returning from yet another Diane-orchestrated crisis. "She's just going through a lot with Melissa's breakup." But I knew it was more than that. I could see it in the way Diane looked at me, like I was an obstacle to be removed, like I was taking something that she thought rightfully belonged to her daughter. The ring disappeared on a Tuesday. James and I had invited Diane and Melissa over for dinner. Another attempt at building bridges that quickly turned into an evening of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled criticisms. I'd taken off my ring to knead the dough for homemade pizzas. It sat on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. I didn't notice it was gone until after they left. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it, but as I tore the apartment apart, a sickening realization began to form in the pit of my stomach. I called James, who was out picking up dessert, and he rushed home to help me search. "It has to be here somewhere," he insisted, moving furniture and checking between couch cushions. "Maybe it fell down the drain." We stayed up until 3 a.m., searching every inch of our apartment. I even got on my hands and knees with a flashlight, checking under appliances and in heating vents. Nothing. The ring was gone. The next morning, exhausted and heartbroken, I called the police to file a report. The officer was sympathetic but not particularly hopeful. "Any idea who might have taken it?" he asked, his pen poised above his notepad. I hesitated. Accusing my future mother-in-law of theft was a nuclear option, one that could permanently damage James's relationship with his family and, by extension, our relationship. But the more I thought about that evening, about how Melissa had lingered in the kitchen while I made coffee, about how Diane had distracted me with questions about wedding plans, the more certain I became. Still, I couldn't bring myself to voice my suspicions. Not without proof. "No," I told the officer. "No idea." When I shared my private thoughts with James later that day, I expected support. Instead, I got defensiveness. "My mom might be difficult sometimes, but she would never steal," he insisted, his voice rising. "And Melissa? She's my sister, Tracy. How could you even think that?" His reaction hurt more than I could express. In that moment, I realized I was alone in this. If I wanted justice, I would have to get it myself. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after the ring disappeared, Diane called to invite us to Sunday dinner, a rare occurrence that immediately raised my suspicions. Usually, James and I had to beg for an invitation to their family gatherings. "Melissa has some exciting news to share," Diane gushed over the phone. "We want the whole family together." My stomach knotted. Exciting news? A terrible premonition formed in my mind. What if? I agreed to the dinner, my mind already forming a plan. If my suspicions were correct, Sunday would be the day of reckoning. And if I was wrong? Well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. The days crawled by. James noticed my distraction but attributed it to stress over the missing ring. He tried to reassure me, promising we'd find it or replace it before the wedding. But I knew better. That ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of acceptance into his family, an acceptance that, apparently, had never truly been offered. Sunday arrived, and as we pulled into Diane's driveway, I took a deep breath. Whatever happens in there, I told James, squeezing his hand. Just remember that I love you. He gave me a puzzled look but squeezed back. I love you too. It's just dinner. Little did he know, it was about to become so much more than that. Walking into Diane's house that Sunday felt like entering the lion's den. The perfectly arranged furniture, the immaculate decor, the family photos where Melissa always seemed to be front and center. It was all designed to showcase the perfect family that I was still struggling to become a part of. Or rather, the family I was never meant to truly join. James squeezed my hand reassuringly as we stepped into the foyer. If only he knew what I suspected, what I was almost certain of at this point. Would he still be holding my hand? Or would he be rushing to his mother's defense? There you are. Diane's voice rang out as she emerged from the kitchen in an apron that looked like it had never seen a speck of food. We were beginning to think you wouldn't make it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, as usual, but there was something different about her today. A gleam of triumph that made my skin crawl. James moved to hug his mother, but I stayed rooted to the spot, scanning the room for Melissa. I didn't have to look far. She was perched on the arm of the living room sofa, chatting with James's father, Robert. When she saw us, she waved enthusiastically, and that's when I saw it. The glint of a familiar diamond on her left hand. My heart stopped. The room seemed to tilt sideways. James's grandmother's ring, my ring, was on Melissa's finger. Surprise! Melissa bounced over, practically shoving her hand in our faces. Look who's engaged! James's jaw dropped. What? To who? When did this happen? A tall man I'd never seen before emerged from the kitchen. That would be me, he said with a confident smile. Rick Stevens. Nice to meet you. As introductions were made, I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the ring. There was no mistaking it. The antique setting, the unique cut of the diamond, the tiny chip on the band's underside that James had promised to fix before our wedding. It was my ring. The one that had been passed down through generations of James's family. The one that had been stolen from our apartment just days ago. Tracy, aren't you going to congratulate them? Diane's voice cut through my thoughts, saccharine sweet but with an edge that dared me to make a scene. I looked up to find everyone staring at me. James looked confused, his gaze darting between my face and Melissa's hand. He hadn't noticed yet. Of course he hadn't. Men rarely pay attention to jewelry details. That's my ring, I said quietly. The room fell silent. What did you say, dear? Diane asked, her smile tightening. I repeated, my voice growing stronger. That's my ring. The one that disappeared from our apartment after you and Melissa visited on Tuesday. Melissa's face flushed red. That's ridiculous. Rick proposed yesterday with this ring. It's been in his family for generations. I turned to Rick, whose confident smile had faltered. Did you really give her that ring? Or did Diane tell you that Melissa had always loved this particular style and conveniently had one just like it? Rick looked between Melissa and Diane, confusion evident on his face. Melissa said she had found her dream ring and showed it to me. Diane said she could get it for me at a discount through a jeweler friend. The pieces were falling into place, and from the look on James's face, he was finally connecting the dots too. Mom? James's voice was tight with disbelief. Is this true? Did you take Tracy's ring to give to Melissa? Diane's composure cracked, just for a moment, before she rallied. Don't be absurd, James. This is a completely different ring. Tracy's imagination is running wild because she lost her ring due to her own carelessness. But James wasn't buying it anymore. He moved closer to Melissa and gently took her hand, examining the ring. His face drained of color as he turned it over, undoubtedly seeing the same chip I had mentioned to him countless times. "This is Grandma's ring," he said flatly. "I'd know it anywhere." Chaos erupted. Melissa burst into tears, claiming ignorance. Rick backed away, clearly wanting no part of this family drama. Robert demanded explanations. And Diane switched tactics. "Fine," she snapped, her carefully cultivated image of perfection shattering before our eyes. "Yes, I took the ring. But can you blame me? That ring has been in our family for generations. It was meant for my daughter, not some outsider." Her words hung in the air, sharp and venomous. I should have been hurt, but strangely, I felt calm. This was the moment of truth I'd been waiting for. "So you admit you stole from me," I said evenly. Diane's eyes narrowed. "I reclaimed what was rightfully ours. That ring was never meant for you. James was supposed to marry someone from our circle, someone who understood our traditions, our status, not some ordinary girl who can't even keep track of her own engagement ring." James stepped between us, his face a storm of emotions. "Stop it, Mom. Just stop. Tracy is the woman I love, the woman I chose to give Grandma's ring to. Not you, not Melissa, not anyone else gets to make that decision." For the first time since I'd known her, Diane seemed at a loss for words. The perfect facade had cracked completely, revealing the bitter, controlling woman beneath. "I think we should go," James said, taking my hand. "Melissa, give Tracy back her ring." Melissa hesitated, looking to her mother for guidance. Diane's expression hardened as she realized she was losing control of the situation. "Melissa, don't you dare!" she hissed. "That ring is yours now." Rick proposed with it. "It's legally yours." Rick, who had been watching the drama unfold with increasing horror, finally spoke up. "Actually, if it was stolen, it's not legally anything except evidence of theft." He turned to Melissa with disappointment written all over his face. Did you know? Did you know it was stolen?" Melissa's tears flowed faster. "Not at first. Mom said she found it in their guest bathroom after they visited. She said Tracy must have forgotten it, and that it was a sign that she wasn't meant to have it. I thought we were just returning it to our family where it belonged. By putting it on your finger and pretending it was from Rick?" James asked incredulously. "Come on, Mel. You knew exactly what you were doing." The truth was unraveling, thread by shameful thread. I stood in the middle of it all, watching a family implode because of one woman's determination to control everyone and everything around her. They say that the moment before a storm breaks is eerily calm. That's exactly how it felt standing in Diane's living room as years of manipulation and deceit finally came crashing down around us. The silence was deafening, broken only by Melissa's quiet sobs and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. A wedding gift from Diane's own mother-in-law, she'd once proudly told me. Robert was the first to move. In all the chaos, I'd almost forgotten he was there. James's father had always been a quiet presence, overshadowed by Diane's commanding personality. He'd smiled kindly at me during family gatherings, but rarely intervened when his wife made her snide remarks. Now he stood up slowly, his face a mask of disappointment and anger. "Diane," he said, his voice low but firm. "Give Tracy her ring back." Diane whirled on him. "Don't you dare take her side, Robert. Everything I've done has been for this family. For our children." "No." Robert shook his head, suddenly looking older than his 60 years. "What you've done was for yourself, for your own ego. You've always needed to control everything and everyone, and I've let you get away with it for far too long. But stealing, lying, turning our children against each other, that stops now." I'd never seen Diane speechless before. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her perfect makeup unable to conceal the flush of anger spreading across her face. Robert turned to Melissa, his expression softening. "Honey, I know your mother put you up to this, but you're a grown woman. You should have known better." Melissa looked down at the ring on her finger, then slowly slid it off. "I'm sorry, Tracy," she whispered, placing it in my palm. "I was jealous. You seem to have everything so easy. The perfect relationship, the perfect ring, the perfect future. Mom kept saying you didn't deserve it, that James was settling, and I let myself believe her." I closed my fingers around the ring, feeling its familiar weight and shape. It should have been a moment of triumph, but it felt hollow. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about trust, family, and the realization that some wounds might never fully heal. James put his arm around me, a solid presence amidst the chaos. "We're leaving," he announced, guiding me toward the door. "And just so everyone is clear, Tracy and I are still getting married, with or without your approval." Diane made one last desperate attempt. "James, please. I was only trying to protect you. She's not right for this family. She'll never understand our traditions, our values." "Stop," James cut her off sharply. "The only person who doesn't understand real family values is you, Mom. Real family doesn't steal, lie, or manipulate. Tracy has shown more integrity today than you have in all the years I've known you." We walked out the door with Diane calling after us, her voice cracking with emotion for perhaps the first time in her life. I didn't look back, but I felt James's grip on my hand tighten as we reached the car. The drive home was silent. I stared at the ring in my palm, its diamond catching the fading evening light. The same ring that had once symbolized love and acceptance now felt tainted, marked by betrayal and deceit. "I'm so sorry," James finally said as we pulled into our apartment complex. "I should have believed you from the start. I should have seen what was happening." I looked over at him, seeing the pain and regret etched across his face. "It's not your fault. She's your mother. You wanted to believe the best of her." "That's no excuse," he insisted. "I let her treat you terribly for years because it was easier than standing up to her. Because it was what I was used to." We sat in the car, the engine cooling as twilight deepened around us. Sometimes the hardest conversations happen in the in-between spaces, not quite home, not quite gone. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. James took a deep breath. "Now we rebuild. On our terms. Without her interference." The weeks that followed were anything but easy. Diane launched a campaign to win back her son's affection. Tearful phone calls, carefully worded apologies that somehow still managed to avoid taking full responsibility, even showing up at our apartment unannounced with gifts and promises to change. James held firm, establishing boundaries for perhaps the first time in his life. He insisted on therapy, for himself individually, and for us as a couple, before he would even consider allowing his mother back into our lives. Melissa reached out separately, meeting me for coffee without her mother's knowledge. "I've been in therapy," she admitted, stirring her latte absently. "Turns out being the perfect daughter comes with its own set of problems. I'm learning how to define myself outside of Mom's expectations." Our wedding was smaller than originally planned. We decided to start fresh, scrapping Diane's elaborate vision in favor of something that truly reflected us. Robert came alone, hugging me tightly before the ceremony. "She's not ready to accept her part in all this," he said sadly. "We're separated now. I couldn't keep enabling her behavior." I felt a pang of sadness for the family that had been fractured, but I also recognized that some breaks are necessary for healing to begin. As for the ring, I wore it on our wedding day, reclaiming its original meaning. James and I talked about it extensively in therapy. working through the complicated emotions it now carried. Our therapist suggested that objects, like people, can be redeemed, their histories acknowledged, but not permitted to dictate their future value. 3 years have passed since that fateful Sunday dinner. Diane is slowly, tentatively becoming part of our lives again, on our terms, with clear boundaries and consequences. She's in therapy too, finally confronting the control issues that nearly destroyed her family. Progress is uneven, marked by setbacks and small victories, but it's progress nonetheless. Sometimes healing doesn't look like perfect reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like protected peace, cautious second chances, and the courage to walk away when necessary. The most valuable thing I've learned through all this isn't about standing up for myself, though that's important too. It's that true family is built on respect, honesty, and mutual support, not obligation or control. It's something you create together, day by day, choice by choice. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? Or walked away completely? Share your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these difficult journeys is the most powerful medicine of all. Remember, blood may be thicker than water, but love, real, honest, respectful love, is thicker than both. If you enjoyed this story about standing up to toxic family members, make sure to hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate each and every one of you who takes the time to support this content. Have you ever had to deal with a difficult in-law or family member who crossed boundaries? Or maybe you've had something precious stolen by someone who was supposed to love and protect you? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one and love connecting with this amazing community. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss my new story uploads every day. I've got so many more wild family drama stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. Check out my playlist Stories for more stories like this one. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Stay strong, set those boundaries, and know your worth. See you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.